The Invitation. Hey there, Night Owl. Yeah, you. The one scrolling at 2 a.m., looking for something to fill the silence. Something to keep you company while the house settles and creaks around you. Well, you found it. Or maybe it found you. Go ahead, turn the lights down. Not off, just down. Let the shadows stretch a little. Get comfortable, but not too comfortable. Pull that blanket up, let your screen glow in the dark like a little campfire, and just listen. Because tonight, we're going somewhere most people don't want to go. Not to the movies, not to the sanitized Hollywood version of terror with its spinning heads and pea soup. No. Tonight, we're going back. Back to the source. Back to a suburban house in the 1940s where a 13-year-old boy started acting strange. This isn't fiction. This isn't a screenplay. This is what happened before William Peter Blatty wrote a single word, before Max von Sydow climbed those stairs in Georgetown, before Linda Blair became a household name and parents everywhere started side-eyeing their kids when they acted up. This is about a boy named Roland Doe. Though that's not his real name, because even now, decades later, the family wanted their privacy protected. Can you blame them? This is about scratches that appeared on skin without cause, about furniture that moved in empty rooms, about a months-long ordeal that left priests shaken, doctors baffled, and a young boy changed. So settle in. This is going to take a while, because the real story is quieter than the movie, slower, more mundane in some ways, and in other ways, so much worse. Because what happened to Roland Doe didn't happen in some Gothic mansion on a hill. It happened in a normal house, on a normal street, to a normal American family who did everything right and still couldn't stop what came through their door. Let's begin. The suburbs are supposed to be safe. Mount Rainier, Maryland, 1949. If you've never heard of it, that's fine. Most people haven't. It's the kind of place that exists in the collective unconscious as suburb. Brick houses with small front yards, tree-lined streets, the occasional dog barking at nothing in the afternoon heat. The kind of place where nothing happens, where the most exciting thing is a new family moving in, or someone painting their shutters a controversial shade of green. The boy, Roland, lived with his parents and his grandmother, a Lutheran family, church-going but not zealous. Ordinary people living ordinary lives in the shadow of Washington, D.C., where history was being made and the world was still recovering from a war that had ended just 4 years prior. Roland was 13. Awkward age. Not quite a child, not quite anything else. Skinny, quiet, a little shy around other kids. He spent a lot of time with his Aunt Harriet, his mother's sister, who lived in St. Louis. Aunt Harriet was, let's call her, spiritually curious. She had an interest in the occult, in spiritualism, in the idea that the dead weren't really gone. They were just on the other side of a very thin curtain waiting to talk. And she taught Roland how to use a Ouija board. Now you're probably thinking, of course it was a Ouija board, because that's how these stories always start, isn't it? Someone gets bored, someone gets curious, someone puts their fingers on a piece of plastic and asks the darkness a question. And the darkness, well, the darkness always answers. But here's the thing. The Ouija board didn't work, not at first. Roland and Aunt Harriet would sit together in the living room, fingers barely touching the planchette, asking questions into the void. Is anyone there? Can you hear us? And nothing. Just the two of them, breathing in the silence, waiting for something that never came. Until January 15th, 1949. That was the day Aunt Harriet died. Heart attack. Sudden, She was there one moment, laughing over Sunday dinner, and gone the next. Just gone. The way people go sometimes, without warning, without goodbyes. And Roland, who'd been close to her, maybe closer than he was to his own parents, took it hard. He wanted to talk to her again, just once, just to know she was okay. So he went back to the Ouija board, alone this time. And this time, something answered. When the knocking started. It began quietly, the way these things always do. Scratching sounds in the walls, late at night when the house was dark and everyone was asleep. Soft at first, almost imperceptible, the kind of sound you convince yourself is just the house settling or a mouse in the walls with a wind pushing a branch against the siding. Roland's mother heard it first. She lay awake in bed, listening to the scratch, scratch, scratch coming from inside the walls of Roland's room, directly above hers. She nudged her husband awake. "Do you hear that?" He did. They went upstairs, opened Roland's door, found him asleep, motionless in bed, moonlight cutting across his face through the window. The scratching stopped. The room was still. They checked the walls, checked for mice, found nothing. The next night, it happened again. And the night after that, always in Roland's room, always when he was asleep. Scratch, 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 like fingernails dragging slowly down the inside of the plaster, like something trying to get out or in. Then, the dripping started. A sound like water dripping from a faucet. Plink, plink, plink. Rhythmic, steady. But there was no water, no leak, no source. Just the sound, echoing through the walls, impossible to locate, impossible to stop. Roland's father was a practical man. He tore open the wall, examined the pipes, called in a plumber. The plumber found nothing. No leaks, no explanation. He left, probably glad to be gone. And that night, the dripping came back. Louder. And then, the knocking. Not scratching now, not dripping. Knocking. 3 heavy thumps like someone pounding a fist against wood. Boom, boom, boom. From inside the walls, from under the floorboards, from nowhere and everywhere. The family stopped sleeping. They'd sit together in the living room at night, listening to the house come alive around them, and there was nothing they could do to make it stop. But that was just the beginning. Because soon, it wasn't just sounds anymore.
Objects in motion. Picture this. You're sitting at the kitchen table, morning light through the windows, coffee brewing, the radio playing softly in the background. Normal, safe, mundane. And then, the chair across from you slides backward, 6 inches, smooth, deliberate. No one touching it. That's what started happening in the dough house. Chairs moving on their own, not wildly, not flying across the room like in the movies, just moving, sliding, tilting, as if someone invisible had just stood up or sat down. A picture frame fell off the wall, then another, always when Roland was nearby. His mother would hang them back up, and the next day, crash, back on the floor, glass everywhere. Footsteps in empty rooms, the sound of someone walking slowly across the hardwood upstairs, back and forth, while the whole family sat downstairs, frozen, listening. Roland's father went to the local Lutheran minister, Reverend Luther Miles Schultz, told him everything, the sounds, the movement, the feeling that something was wrong in their home. Schultz was skeptical. Of course he was. Men of God are trained to be skeptical. to look for rational explanations, hysteria, delusion, pranks. But he agreed to visit the house, to observe, to pray. He came on a cold February evening, sat with the family in the living room, prayed with them, read scripture, and for a while everything was quiet, peaceful even. Then Roland went to bed, and the scratching started. Schultz went upstairs, stood in the doorway of Roland's room, watching the boy sleep, and as he watched, he saw the blanket begin to move. Not rustling, not shifting like someone rolling over in their sleep. Moving, deliberately, slowly sliding off the bed as if someone were pulling it, inch by inch, toward the floor. Schultz grabbed the blanket, pulled it back up. It slid off again. He tried again, same result. He stood there in the dark in that small suburban bedroom, pulling a blanket back onto a sleeping child over and over again, while something he couldn't see pulled it away. Later, he would describe a feeling of presence, of being watched by something that didn't like him being there, something that wanted him to leave. He didn't leave, not yet, but he would soon. The boy who couldn't stay still. By late February, Roland was changing. Not dramatically, not at all at once, but his parents noticed. He was quieter, more withdrawn. He'd sit at the dinner table and stare at nothing, fork halfway to his mouth, eyes distant. He started waking up with scratches on his body, thin red lines across his chest, his arms, his legs, as if someone had dragged their nails across his skin while he slept. But his nails were trimmed short, and he slept alone. His mother examined the scratches every morning, her hands shaking, and found no explanation, no rational explanation. The lines were too precise, too deliberate. Then came the night Roland's bed started moving. Not just the blanket this time, the entire bed, a heavy wooden frame with a mattress and box spring. It shook violently, loud enough to wake the whole house. His parents ran upstairs and found Roland pinned to the mattress, eyes wide, unable to move, while the bed lurched and rattled like something was underneath it, trying to get out. His father grabbed him, pulled him off the bed, held him while the bed continued to shake on its own, scraping across the floor, until finally, it stopped. They didn't let Roland sleep in that room anymore. They moved him to the guest room. Different room, different bed. Surely it would be better. It wasn't. The bed there moved too. And this time, Roland moved with it. He'd be lying still, eyes closed, and then suddenly his whole body would jerk violently to one side, as if someone had shoved him, again and again, hard enough to bruise. His parents held him down, tried to keep him still, prayed over him, and Roland, poor Roland, just stared at the ceiling, silent, tears running down his face. Reverend Schultz came back, saw it happen, saw a 13-year-old boy thrashing on a bed that was also thrashing, and he made a decision. This wasn't something he could handle. This was something else, something older. He told the family to go to the Catholics, because if this was what he thought it was, if this was something demonic, then they needed a priest. They needed someone who knew the rituals, someone who'd done this before. The family was Lutheran. They'd never set foot in a Catholic church, but they were desperate. So they went. And that's when things got worse. Pause. Long silence. The sound of wind against a window. Still with me? Good, because we're just getting started. The thing about exorcisms, real exorcisms, is that they don't happen quickly. They're not a one-night affair with dramatic music and a climactic battle between good and evil. They're slow, methodical, exhausting. They can take weeks, months even. And the thing inside, it doesn't want to leave. It fights every single step. We'll get to the priests in a moment. We'll get to the rituals, the holy water, the Latin prayers shouted into the dark. we'll get to the moment when words started appearing on his skin, written with scratches from the inside. But first, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you were being watched in your own home? Like there's someone just outside your field of vision, standing in the hallway, waiting for you to turn around? That's what the Doe House felt like, every day, every night, for months. And the worst part? They were right. Another pause, the sound of something creaking in the distance. Let's talk about what happens when you ask the Catholic Church for help, and what it costs.
When the church gets involved. So, the Catholics, the family, desperate, exhausted, terrified in their own home, reached out to the Archdiocese of Washington. They told their story to a priest named Father E. Albert Hughes, and Father Hughes, to his credit, didn't dismiss them, didn't tell them it was hysteria or adolescent rebellion or a gas leak making them see things that weren't there. He listened. And then he watched. Father Hughes visited the Doe home in late February. He came prepared with holy water, blessed medals, a rosary. He came with the authority of the church and the confidence of a man who'd spent decades in service to God. He came believing that faith, real faith, could overcome anything. And for about 3 days, it seemed like he might be right. He blessed the house, blessed Roland's room, blessed Roland himself, making the sign of the cross on the boy's forehead with holy water while murmuring prayers in Latin. He left sacred objects throughout the house, medals tucked under pillows, crucifixes hung on walls, rosaries draped over door frames. The activity lessened, the scratching stopped, the objects stayed still. The family slept through the night for the first time in weeks. They thought it was over. It wasn't over. The resistance. On the 4th night, Roland woke up screaming. Not the scream of a nightmare, not the startled yelp of someone waking confused in the dark. This was different, primal, the kind of scream that makes your blood turn cold because you know it's not entirely human. His parents ran to his room and found him sitting upright in bed, eyes open but unseeing, screaming and screaming and screaming. And on his chest, scratched into his skin, red and raised and bleeding, were letters. H-E-L-L. Just that, 4 letters, carved from the inside out. They called Father Hughes. He arrived within the hour, still in his sleeping clothes, and when he saw Roland, when he saw those letters, his face went pale. But he didn't run. He stayed, knelt beside the bed, began to pray. And Roland stopped screaming. Instead, he started laughing. Not a child's laugh, low, guttural, wrong, the kind of laugh that sounds like it's coming from somewhere deep underground. Father Hughes kept praying, louder now, holding Roland's hand, and Roland leaned forward and whispered something in his ear. Something that made Father Hughes stop praying, made him stand up, made him back toward the door. We don't know what Roland said. Father Hughes never told anyone, but whatever it was, it shook him badly. He left the house that night and went straight to his superiors in the Archdiocese. He told them this was beyond him, beyond prayer and holy water and good intentions. This needed an exorcism, a real one, the full Roman ritual, and he needed permission to perform it. The ritual of exorcism. Here's something most people don't know. The Catholic Church doesn't just hand out exorcisms. They're rare, incredibly rare. Before a priest can even attempt one, he needs explicit permission from a bishop. And before a bishop grants that permission, there's an investigation. Doctors are consulted, psychiatrists. The church wants to rule out every possible natural explanation, mental illness, epilepsy, trauma, fraud, before they even consider the supernatural. Because once you perform an exorcism, you're making a statement. You're saying, yes, demons are real. Yes, they can possess human beings. Yes, the battle between good and evil is not metaphorical. And the church doesn't make that statement lightly.
But in early March 1949, after reviewing the Doe case, after interviewing the family, after speaking with Reverend Schultz, after examining Roland himself, Archbishop Patrick O'Boyle of Washington granted permission. Father Hughes could proceed. On March 9th, Father Hughes returned to the Doe home with another priest and 2 assistants from the church. They brought with them the Rituale Romanum, the official book of Catholic rites, open to the section titled Exorcising the Obsessed. They brought crucifixes, holy water, blessed salt, relics of saints. They prepared the room, Roland's room, like a battlefield. Because that's what it was about to become. Roland was brought in and laid on the bed. He was calm, almost eerily calm. He smiled at the priests, asked them how they were. Perfectly polite, perfectly normal. Father Hughes began to read the ritual in Latin, Exorcizote, omni spiritus immunde. And Roland's smile widened.
The first exorcism. They say the temperature in the room dropped, that their breath came out in clouds, that the lights flickered and dimmed until they were working in near darkness, reading by candlelight that wavered and threatened to go out. Father Hughes kept reading. The words of the ritual are ancient, powerful, a direct command from the church to any demonic presence. I cast you out, unclean spirit. I cast you out in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Roland started to twitch. Small movements at first, a finger, a toe. Then his whole body began to convulse. Not like a seizure. The priests had seen seizures. This was different, controlled, deliberate, as if something else was moving him from the inside. His voice changed, deepened. He began to speak in a language none of them recognized, guttural, harsh. The syllables didn't sound like they should come from a human throat. Father Hughes sprinkled holy water on him. Roland screamed, his skin reddened where the water touched, as if it burned. He thrashed against the restraints they'd used to hold him to the bed, strong, impossibly strong for a 13-year-old boy. It took 2 grown men to keep him pinned down. And then the smell hit them. Rot, sulfur, decay, the smell of something dead and buried clawing its way back to the surface. It filled the room, made them gag. One of the assistants had to leave, stumbling into the hallway to vomit. Father Hughes kept reading. Roland's eyes rolled back until only the whites showed. He hissed, spat. His body arched off the bed, spine bending at an angle that shouldn't have been possible. And then he spoke again, this time in perfect English, in a voice that wasn't his. You think your words can touch me, priest? You think your God has power here? Father Hughes's voice didn't waver. He kept reading. Louder now, commanding, in the name of Jesus Christ, I order you to depart. And Roland laughed and laughed, and then suddenly he lunged. The attack. The restraints snapped, just snapped, like thread. Roland, or the thing inside Roland, launched himself off the bed directly at Father Hughes, hands outstretched, fingers curled like claws. The other priest grabbed him, tried to pull him back. Roland twisted in his grip with inhuman flexibility and sank his teeth into the man's arm, drew blood. The priest screamed. Roland shoved him away and went for Father Hughes again. Hughes backed against the wall, still holding the ritual book, still trying to read, and Roland's hand shot out and grabbed a loose bed spring, metal, rusted, jagged, and slashed it across Father Hughes's arm. Deep, blood everywhere. The other men finally wrestled Roland back onto the bed, holding him down while he thrashed and screamed and laughed and wept all at once, his voice cycling through emotions and octaves too fast to follow. Father Hughes dropped the book, clutched his arm, stared at the boy, this child, this victim, and saw something looking back at him that was not a child at all. He called for a doctor, called for an ambulance. He needed stitches, 20 of them. And as they carried him out of the house, as they loaded him into the car, he could still hear Roland's laughter echoing from the upstairs window.
The exorcism had failed. Father Hughes never tried again. He wrote a report to the Archbishop, described everything that had happened, said that he believed, truly believed, that Roland Doe was possessed by a demonic entity, but he also said he couldn't help him, couldn't finish what he'd started. The case would have to be handed over to someone else, someone stronger, someone more experienced, someone willing to risk everything. The family was told to wait, to pray, to keep the boy safe, and in the meantime, Roland's condition continued to deteriorate. The scratches multiplied. Words appeared on his skin almost daily now. Not just hell, other words, spite, go, no, entire sentences sometimes, written backwards in letters that looked carved by something sharp and precise. He stopped eating, stopped speaking, just stared at nothing for hours at a time, and when he did speak, it wasn't his voice. His parents were at their breaking point, and that's when they made a decision that would change everything. They decided to leave, to take Roland away from Maryland, away from the house, away from everything familiar. They'd go to St. Louis, to family. Maybe distance would help. Maybe whatever was attached to their son was attached to the place, and leaving would break the connection. So, in mid-March 1949, the Doe family packed their car and drove west. 10 hours, straight through, didn't stop except for gas, didn't look back. They thought they were running away, but you can't run from something that's inside you. And whatever was inside Roland, it came with them. Silence. The sound of a car engine fading into static. St. Louis, the gateway to the West, a city of brick and river and arch, a place where the Doe family hoped they'd find sanctuary, safety, a fresh start. Instead, they found something waiting for them, because the thing inside Roland, it didn't care about geography, didn't care about state lines or fresh starts or desperate prayers. It had claimed its territory, and that territory was a 13-year-old boy's body, and it wasn't done with him yet, not even close. Let me tell you what happened in St. Louis. Let me tell you about the priests who came next, about the Jesuit who would eventually write everything down in a diary so detailed, so meticulous, that decades later it would become the foundation for one of the most famous horror novels ever written. Let me tell you about the room in Alexian Brothers Hospital where they performed the final exorcism, about the sounds that came from that room, about the things Roland said in languages he'd never learned, about the moment when something inside him finally spoke its name. But first, let me tell you what it's like to be possessed. Not the Hollywood version, the real thing. The slow, creeping loss of yourself, the feeling of something else moving your hands, speaking with your mouth, looking out through your eyes. Roland would later say he remembered almost nothing, that it was like being underwater, sounds muffled, sights blurred, his body doing things he didn't choose, couldn't control. And sometimes, just sometimes, he'd surface for a moment, see his parents crying, see the priests praying, feel the scratches burning on his skin, and then he'd slip under again, into the dark, into the thing that was waiting there.
The journey west. The drive to St. Louis took forever and no time at all. Roland's father drove. His mother sat in the back with the boy, holding him, whispering prayers she half remembered from childhood. Roland sat between them, silent, staring out the window at the landscape rolling past. Indiana, Illinois, mile markers ticking by like a countdown. They stopped once, a gas station somewhere outside Indianapolis, middle of nowhere. The attendant, an older man with oil-stained hands and a cigarette hanging from his lip, filled the tank while Roland's father paid inside. Roland's mother watched her son through the car window. He was smiling. Not at anything, just smiling. Wide. Too wide. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, because the eyes aren't looking at anything in this world. She knocked on the window. "Roland? Sweetheart?" He turned to look at her, still smiling, and mouthed a single word. "Soon." She climbed back into the car and locked the doors and didn't let Roland out for the rest of the trip. They arrived in St. Louis just after midnight, pulled up to the home of Roland's cousin, a man named Raymond Bishop, who'd agreed to take them in, no questions asked, or at least not many questions. The family had called ahead, explained that Roland was sick, that they needed somewhere to stay while they figured things out. Raymond met them at the door, saw the boy, pale, thin, with dark circles under his eyes and scratches visible on his neck, and knew this wasn't just sickness, not the normal kind. But he was family, so he let them in. They put Roland in the upstairs bedroom, small room, single window overlooking the street, a bed, a dresser, a crucifix on the wall that Raymond's wife had hung there years ago. Roland looked at the crucifix, tilted his head, and the crucifix fell off the wall. Just fell, as if the nail had never been there, clattered to the floor while Roland stood motionless, still staring at the empty space where it had been. Raymond picked it up, hung it back up, used a bigger nail this time, made sure it was secure. It fell again, and again. On the fourth try, the crucifix didn't just fall, it flew across the room, hit the opposite wall with enough force to crack the plaster, and landed face down on the floor. Raymond left it there. The Jesuits. By this point, word of Roland's condition had spread through the Catholic community. A boy in Maryland, they said, who'd been attacked during an exorcism, who's injured a priest, whose family had fled across state lines. The Archbishop of St. Louis, Joseph Ritter, was contacted. He reviewed the case, spoke with Archbishop O'Boyle in Washington, read Father Hugh's report, and he assigned the case to the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus, the intellectual warriors of the Catholic Church, men trained in theology, philosophy, science, men who approached faith with both heart and mind. If anyone could handle it, they could. The lead priest was Father William Bowdern, mid-50s, experienced, calm. He'd served as a military chaplain during World War II, had seen men die, had administered last rites on battlefields, had stared into the face of human evil and come away with his faith intact. But he'd never performed an exorcism. He brought with him Father Raymond Bishop, no relation to Roland's cousin, oddly enough, and Father Walter Halloran, a young Jesuit, barely 30, who'd been ordained just a few years earlier. Strong, athletic, the kind of man you wanted in the room if things got physical, which they would. On March 16, 1949, the three priests arrived at Raymond Bishop's home. They met the family, spoke gently with Roland, who was polite and quiet, and seemed, for all the world, like a normal teenage boy going through a rough patch. Father Bowdern asked him questions. "How are you feeling? Are you eating? Sleeping?" Roland answered, "Yes, fine. A little tired, maybe." "Do you remember what happened in Maryland?" A pause. Then, "No, not really." Father Bowdern nodded. He'd expected that. Possession victims often had gaps in their memory. It was a mercy, in a way, the mind protecting itself from trauma. He told the family they'd need to conduct a full examination, medical and spiritual. They'd need to watch Roland over several days, document everything, rule out natural causes before proceeding with an exorcism. The family agreed. The priests moved into the house, and that night, the real show began. The diary. Father Walter Halloran kept a diary. Every day, every night, for the next 2 months, he wrote down everything he saw, everything he heard, times, dates, details. It's one of the most thorough accounts of an alleged possession ever recorded,
dozens of pages, hundreds of entries, and it's horrifying in its mundanity. March 16th, 11:45 p.m. Scratching sounds from Roland's room. Investigated. Found Roland asleep. Scratching continued. Appeared to come from inside the walls. March 17th, 2:30 a.m. Loud crash. Found chair in Roland's room overturned. Roland claims he did not move it. March 17th, 4 a.m. Roland complaining of stomach pain. Lifted his shirt to examine. Found fresh scratches across his abdomen. 3 parallel lines, deep, bleeding. And on, night after night. The scratches multiplied, the objects moved, the sounds intensified. But the priests didn't just watch, they tested. They sprinkled holy water on Roland without him knowing, watched for a reaction. His skin reddened, he screamed, said it burned. They blessed ordinary water and sprinkled that on him. No reaction. They placed sacred relics near him while he slept, fragments of saints' bones sewn into cloth pouches. In the morning, the pouches would be across the room, torn open, the relics scattered. They prayed over him, held his hands, sang hymns, and Roland, sweet, quiet Roland, would spit in their faces. By late March, Father Bowden was convinced this was genuine, this was possession. He applied to Archbishop Ritter for permission to perform an exorcism. Permission was granted. The ritual was scheduled for April 11th, 1949. They had 3 weeks to prepare. 3 weeks during which Roland's condition would get so much worse. The words appear. It started with single letters, then words, then sentences. They'd appear on Roland's body overnight, scratched into his skin while he slept, or sometimes while he was awake. He'd be sitting at the dinner table, eating soup, and suddenly he'd wince, double over, lift his shirt, and there'd be a new word carved across his ribs. Priest, no, go, hell. The family would bandage him, clean the wounds, pray over him, and the next day there'd be more. Father Halloran documented every word, drew sketches of their placement, photographed them if possible, though this was 1949. Photography wasn't as easy and ubiquitous as it is now. But the strangest thing, the words weren't always in English. Sometimes they were in Latin, spite, dominus, words that Roland, a Lutheran boy with a public school education, shouldn't have known. Once the word hell appeared across his chest, but backwards, as if someone had written it from the inside looking out. The priests began sleeping in shifts, one always awake, always watching, because Roland was becoming dangerous. He'd lash out without warning, punch, kick, bite. He broke Father Halloran's nose once, headbutting it during a prayer session, drew blood. The young priest staggered back, eyes watering, and Roland laughed. That same laugh, low, guttural, not his. And then, just as suddenly, Roland would collapse, start crying, apologize, say he didn't mean to, say he didn't remember doing it. The priests believed him, because they could see it now, the shift, the moment when Roland's eyes would change, pupils dilating, focus sharpening, and something else would look out. Something old, something that hated them.
Alexian Brothers Hospital. By April, the situation had become untenable. Roland couldn't stay in a private home anymore. It was too dangerous, too disruptive. The neighbors were starting to ask questions. Strange sounds at all hours, screaming, crashes. So the Jesuits made arrangements with Alexian Brothers Hospital, a Catholic hospital run by a religious order with an entire wing dedicated to psychiatric care. If they were going to perform an exorcism, a real multi-day full ritual exorcism, they needed a controlled environment. They needed a place where Roland's screams wouldn't disturb anyone, where the sounds of a battle between good and evil could rage without interruption. On April 11th, Roland was admitted to Alexian Brothers Hospital. He was checked into a private room on the 5th floor. Barred windows, reinforced bed, a single crucifix on the wall. His parents stayed in a nearby hotel, visited during the day, held his hand, told him they loved him. And at night, the priests came. They brought their tools, their books, their faith, and they began the exorcism. The sound of a match striking, a candle flickering to life. What happened over the next 6 weeks in that hospital room is almost impossible to describe, not because it's too fantastical, though it is, but because it defies rational explanation. It challenges everything we think we know about the world. But I'm going to try, because this isn't Hollywood. This isn't special effects and makeup. This is what the priests recorded, what they witnessed, what they carried with them for the rest of their lives. Let me take you into that room. Let me show you what an exorcism really looks like. A door creaks open, slow, heavy. Room 314. That's where they took him. 5th floor of Alexian Brothers Hospital. A psychiatric ward room, but they'd modified it. Removed anything that could be used as a weapon. Anything sharp. Anything loose. The bed was bolted to the floor. The single window had bars that had been there for decades, installed for patients who might harm themselves. Those bars would be tested. The priests arrived at sunset. Father Bowdern led the way, carrying the Rituale Romanum bound in worn black leather. Father Raymond Bishop followed with a wooden case containing their supplies, holy water in glass bottles, blessed salt in paper packets, consecrated oil, sacred relics, a purple stole embroidered with crosses. Father Halloran came last. He carried restraints, leather straps, medical grade, the kind they used in psychiatric wards in 1949 when sedation wasn't enough. Roland was already in the bed, calm, almost serene. He smiled when they entered. "Good evening, fathers." His voice was his own, light, boyish, a little nervous maybe, but appropriate for a 13-year-old about to undergo something he didn't fully understand. Father Bowdern approached the bed, placed his hand on Roland's forehead. It was cool, normal temperature. "How are you feeling, son?" "Fine, Father. A little scared." "That's understandable. We're here to help you, to free you from whatever is causing you distress. Do you understand?" "Yes, Father." "Good." Bowdern removed his hand, opened the Rituale Romanum. "Then let us begin." He made the sign of the cross. "In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti." Roland closed his eyes, and the temperature dropped. The first night. Not dramatically, not like in the movies where you can see your breath in great clouds, just a chill, the kind that makes you pull your collar tighter, makes the hair on your arms stand up. Father Bowdern began to read, Latin flowing from his mouth in steady, measured syllables, the ancient words of the Church, refined over centuries, designed to compel and banish. "I exorcise you, every unclean spirit, in the name of God the Father Almighty." Roland's eyes remained closed. His breathing was even, steady. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Just a priest reading Latin over a sleeping boy while 2 other priests stood watch, and the room grew slowly colder. Then Roland's eyes opened. But he didn't look at the priests. He looked at the ceiling, fixed, unblinking, as if he could see something there that they couldn't. Father Bowdern kept reading. Roland's hands clenched, the knuckles went white, his jaw tightened, tendons standing out in his neck like cables drawn taut. "In virtutes Spiritus Sancti," and in the power of the Holy Spirit. Roland started to shake, small tremors at first, then harder, violent. The bed rattled despite being bolted down. Father Halloran moved closer, ready to restrain him if needed. Then Roland screamed. Not loud, that came later. This was softer, higher pitched,
the scream of someone in pain, deep, unendurable pain. He arched off the bed, spine bowing, only his head and heels touching the mattress. Father Bowden's voice rose, louder, more forceful. Praepio tibi, I command you. And Roland dropped back onto the bed, gasping. His eyes rolled back, the whites showing. And when he opened his mouth again, a different voice emerged. Lower, rougher, speaking English now, but with an accent none of them could place. You waste your time, priest. Father Bowden didn't flinch. In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to tell me your name. Laughter, that horrible grinding laughter. Names have power, old man. You'll get nothing from me. Then I will continue until you surrender it. More laughter. Then Roland's body went rigid again. His mouth opened impossibly wide, too wide, tendons stretching in ways they shouldn't, and he began to speak in Latin, fluent, rapid, mocking the very words Father Bowden was reading, turning them into something obscene. The priests had expected resistance. They'd read the accounts, the documentation from other exorcisms throughout history, but reading about it and experiencing it are different things. This was a child, a 13-year-old boy, and something ancient was speaking through him. The first session lasted 3 hours. When it ended, when Father Bowden closed the book and said the final prayer, Roland collapsed, unconscious, breathing shallow, skin pale and slick with sweat. They cleaned him, changed his clothes, let him sleep. And on his chest, when they lifted his shirt, they found new words. Mine. Scratched deep, still bleeding.
The pattern emerges. The exorcisms became nightly. Every evening at sunset, the priests would return to room 314 and begin again. Sometimes the sessions lasted an hour, sometimes 6. Father Bowden read until his voice gave out. Then Father Bishop would take over. Father Holleran documented everything, recorded the times, the responses, the phenomena. Because phenomena there was. Objects moved, not just in the room, throughout the entire 5th floor. Nurses reported doors slamming on empty wards, lights flickering in sequence, room by room, as if something was pacing the hallway. The temperature fluctuations became more extreme. Some nights the room was freezing, 40 degrees despite the radiator running full blast. Other nights it was stifling, 90 degrees or more. The priests would strip down to their undershirts, sweat pouring, while Roland lay there seemingly unaffected. The smell was constant, that rot and sulfur smell that had plagued the house in Maryland. It came and went in waves, sometimes so strong the priests had to step out into the hallway to breathe, sometimes faint, underlying, a reminder that something was present. And Roland's transformations became more dramatic. His voice would change mid-sentence, cycle through different tones, different accents, a child's voice, an old man's, a woman's. Once, unmistakably, a deep rumble that Father Holleran later described as not human, not anything living. His strength increased. Even restrained, he could throw grown men across the room. Father Holleran, 6 feet tall, former athlete, was holding Roland's left arm during a particularly violent episode when the boy, this skinny 13-year-old, yanked his arm free and sent Holleran sprawling into the wall hard enough to crack plaster. It took all 3 priests to hold him down after that, and even then it was barely enough. But the worst part, the part that shook them most, was the knowledge. What Roland shouldn't know. During the sessions, the entity speaking through Roland would reveal things, private things, things about the priests' lives that no one else knew. Father Bowden's sister had died when he was a child, drowned in a lake. He'd never spoken about it, never told anyone. It was a private grief he'd carried for 40 years. Roland, or the thing inside Roland, described her death in perfect detail, down to the color of her dress, the time of day, the way the water looked when they pulled her body out.
Father Bishop had struggled with his vocation as a young man, had nearly left the seminary, had a crisis of faith that almost destroyed him. He'd confessed it once, decades ago, to his spiritual advisor. No one else knew. The entity knew, described it, mocked him for it. "You nearly gave up," it said in that grinding, wrong voice, "nearly walked away. What kind of priest are you?" Father Holleran had a sister. She was sick, cancer. He'd been praying for her every night, hadn't told anyone in St. Louis, hadn't mentioned it to his fellow Jesuits. The entity knew her name, knew her diagnosis, knew how long the doctors had given her. "She's dying," it said, and Roland's face twisted into something approximating sympathy, but wrong, all wrong. "You know that, don't you? Your prayers won't save her, just like they won't save this boy." How did it know? There's no rational answer, no explanation that fits within the bounds of what we understand about the world. Either Roland had somehow researched all three priests, their histories, their families, their deepest secrets in the brief time before his possession began, or something else was at work. Something that could look into a person and see every shadow they'd ever tried to hide. The priests continued. The breaking point. By late April, Father Bowden was exhausted. They all were. Nights without sleep, days spent praying, studying, trying to understand what they were fighting. But Bowden had it worst. He was the lead exorcist, the primary target. The entity hated him with a focused intensity that was almost personal. During sessions, it would speak directly to him, not to the other priests, just him. "You're weak, Bowden. You know that. Weak. Your faith is a crutch, a lie you tell yourself so you don't have to face the void." Bowden would respond with scripture, with prayer, but there were moments, Father Holleran recorded them, when his voice would waver, when doubt would creep in. Because how do you maintain absolute faith when something is staring you in the face and laughing at it? On April 18th, 1 week into the hospital exorcisms, Bowden collapsed, middle of a session, just fell. Exhaustion, stress, his body giving out. They carried him out, let him rest for 2 days. Father Bishop took over as lead exorcist, and the entity laughed. "One down," it said through Roland's mouth. "Who's next?" But Bowden came back. On April 20th, he returned to room 314, thinner, paler, but determined. He opened the Rituale Romanum. He began to read. And this time, he didn't stop. The marathon session. April 20th through April 22nd, 5 days, not continuously, but close. Sessions that lasted 8, 10, 12 hours, the priests rotating in and out, taking breaks only when they physically couldn't continue. Roland barely slept, barely ate. His body was shutting down under the strain. He'd lost 20 pounds since the exorcisms began. His skin had a grayish tinge, dark circles under his eyes like bruises. But the entity was weakening too. Father Bowden could sense it. The resistance was fiercer, but also more desperate. The entity was expending enormous energy, revealing cracks in its armor. During these marathon sessions, Roland spoke in languages none of them recognized. Aramaic, they thought, maybe ancient Hebrew. The sounds, harsh and guttural, spat out like curses. He levitated. Father Holleran recorded it. April 20th, 11:47 p.m. Roland's body rose off the bed, not far, maybe 6 inches, but it rose. Hovered there for approximately 10 seconds, then dropped back down. All 3 priests saw it. Later, they would be questioned, interrogated, accused of fabrication, but they never wavered. It happened. The bed itself moved. Despite being bolted down, it shook so violently that the bolts began to work loose. Maintenance had to come in during the day and reinforce them. And through it all, Father Bowden read the same words over and over, commanding, compelling, "In the name of Jesus Christ, depart from this servant of God." On April 22nd, just after midnight, something changed. Roland went completely still. His eyes opened, clear, lucid, his own eyes. He looked at Father Bowden and whispered, "Help me." Just that, 2 words, in his own voice, the voice of a terrified child who'd been trapped in his own body, watching horrors he couldn't control. Father Bowden grabbed his hand. "We are helping you, son. Hold on. Just hold on." Roland's eyes closed. When they opened again, the entity was back. But it was tired. They all were. The entity knew it was losing. And that's when they finally gave them what they'd been asking for since the beginning. It spoke its name.
The name. Names have power. That's one of the oldest beliefs in human history. To know something's name is to have power over it, control. The ancient Egyptians believed it, the medieval grimoires insisted on it, and the Catholic Church built its exorcism ritual around it. Tell me your name. For weeks, the entity had refused, mocked them, laughed, given false names, claimed to be demons from obscure medieval texts, claimed to be Satan himself, but never the truth. Until April 23rd, 1949, 2:15 a.m. Father Bowden was reading, voice hoarse, almost gone. Father Bishop supported him, one hand on his shoulder. Father Halloran stood at the foot of the bed, holding Roland's legs as the boy thrashed. Father Bowden reached the part of the ritual where the exorcist demands the demon's name. He'd said it 100 times before, but this time, something was different. The room went silent. The thrashing stopped. The sounds stopped. Even the smell, that ever-present rot, faded. Roland's body relaxed completely. His head lolled to one side, and when he spoke, it was in a voice none of them had heard before. Quiet, almost a whisper, but with a weight behind it that made the air feel heavy. It spoke a name. Father Halloran wrote it down phonetically because he didn't know how to spell it. Later, consulting with linguistic experts, with scholars of ancient languages, they determined it was likely a corruption of several names from different demonological traditions. I won't write it here, not because I'm being coy, but because there's a tradition, a belief among those who deal with these things that names should not be repeated, that to speak them is to invite attention. But the priests knew. They had what they needed. The entity had revealed itself, and in doing so, it had given them the weapon to defeat it. Father Bowden's voice strengthened. He addressed the entity by name, commanded it, used the full authority of the church, of the priesthood, of centuries of faith and tradition. "I cast you out, name, in the name of Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God. Depart and never return." Roland screamed. Not the rough, guttural voice of the entity. Roland, the boy, a child's scream of pure agony. His body convulsed. The bed shook so hard it tore free from its moorings, bolts shearing off with sounds like gunshots. The 3 priests threw themselves on top of him, pinning him down with their combined weight. Father Bowden kept reading, shouting now, the Latin prayers echoing off the walls of room 314 while Roland thrashed beneath them. The lights went out. All of them, not just in the room, the entire 5th floor, plunged into darkness. The only light came from the candles the priests had brought, 2 small flames flickering against an ocean of black. And in that darkness, something moved. Father Halloran felt it. A pressure, like standing at the bottom of the ocean, a weight pressing down from all sides. He could barely breathe, could barely move. But he held on. They all did. Father Bowden's voice rose above the chaos. "Exorcizo te! I cast you out." A sound like thunder, like the world cracking open. The windows shattered, glass exploding inward, raining down on the bed. And through the broken window came a wind that shouldn't have been possible. Not from a 5th floor window. Not on a calm April night. The candles went out. Complete darkness.
The priests held Roland in the dark, feeling him convulse and scream and fight, and they prayed, all of them, words pouring out in Latin and English and languages of the heart that have no name. And then, silence. The wind stopped. The pressure lifted. Roland went limp. For a moment, a terrible, suspended moment, the priests thought he was dead, that whatever had been inside him had killed him in its final act of spite. Father Halloran found a flashlight, clicked it on with shaking hands. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating Roland's face. The boy's eyes were open, clear, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Father?" His own voice, weak, confused. "Father Bowdern?" "Yes, son, I'm here." Is it over?" Father Bowdern looked at Father Bishop, at Father Halloran. They were thinking the same thing. How many times had the entity tricked them, pretended to be Roland? How could they know this was real? But something was different. The air in the room felt lighter, cleaner. The oppressive weight that had hung over everything for weeks was gone. Father Bowdern placed his hand on Roland's forehead, made the sign of the cross, said a prayer of blessing. Roland didn't react, didn't scream or curse or thrash, just lay there, breathing quietly, tears still falling. "I think," Father Bowdern said slowly, "I think it might be." The aftermath. They kept Roland in the hospital for another week, observation, making sure. The entity had been cast out before, or seemed to be, only to return. They weren't taking chances. But the signs were unmistakable. The scratches stopped appearing, the voices stopped, the movement of objects, the temperature changes, the smells. All of it ceased. Roland slept through the night, ate meals, spoke normally. He remembered almost nothing of the previous months, fragments, pieces, like a fever dream he couldn't quite recall. The priests documented everything. Father Halloran's diary became 26 pages of notes, medical records, testimony from nurses and staff members, photographs of the scratches, the destroyed crucifix, the broken window. They sent their report to Archbishop Ritter. Ritter forwarded it to Rome. And Rome, well, Rome did what Rome does, filed it away, noted it, added it to the vast archives of exorcism cases that stretch back centuries. Because the church doesn't shout about these things, doesn't publicize them. To do so would invite skepticism, mockery, attention. Better to work quietly, to help when called upon, and otherwise remain silent. On May 2nd, 1949, Roland Doe was discharged from Alexian Brothers Hospital, fully recovered. No lasting physical effects beyond some faint scars. No psychological trauma that couldn't be addressed with time and therapy. He went home with his parents, back to Maryland eventually, grew up, lived a normal life, got married, had a family, a career. By all accounts, he never spoke about what happened to him, never sought fame or attention. He just moved on. The priests moved on too. Father Bowdern returned to his parish, continued his work, never performed another exorcism. Father Bishop did the same, and Father Halloran, young Father Halloran who documented everything, eventually left the active priesthood, though he remained a Jesuit until his death in 2005. They'd tell the story if asked, answer questions from scholars and researchers, but they didn't seek out the spotlight. What they'd witnessed in room 314 wasn't entertainment, wasn't a story to be sensationalized. It was a battle, a war fought on a spiritual level that most people never have to face. And they won. At least, that's what they believed. The question that remains. Here's the thing, though. The question that haunts every exorcism case, every account of alleged possession. Was it real? I mean, really real? Or was it something else? Mental illness? Trauma? Hysteria? A shared delusion among desperate people looking for answers to inexplicable events?
The skeptics have their theories. They always do. Temporal lobe epilepsy can cause hallucinations, strange voices, even the sensation of a presence. Tourette's syndrome can produce involuntary vocalizations, violent tics. Dissociative identity disorder, what used to be called multiple personality disorder, can create distinct personas with different voices and mannerisms. Add in the power of suggestion. A 13-year-old boy in a highly religious environment, stressed by his aunt's death, acting out in ways that match his subconscious understanding of possession. The priests and family believing in demons interpret every symptom through that lens and inadvertently reinforce the behavior. It's a compelling argument, rational, grounded in psychology and neuroscience. But it doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain the knowledge, the things the entity knew about the priests' private lives. It doesn't explain the languages, the fluent Latin from a boy who'd never studied it, the phrases in Aramaic that linguistic experts later confirmed were accurate. It doesn't explain the strength. 3 grown men barely able to restrain a 13-year-old child. And it certainly doesn't explain the objects. The crucifix flying across rooms, the bed moving despite being bolted down, the levitation that all 3 priests witnessed and documented. You can dismiss 1 priest's testimony as mistaken, 2 as collaborative delusion, but 3? Intelligent, educated men? War veterans, scholars, men trained to observe and record accurately. They all saw the same things. So what was it? I don't know. And that's the honest answer. I don't know if demons are real, if possession is possible, if there's a literal war between good and evil being fought in the shadows while most of us go about our lives oblivious. But I know what the priests reported. I know what they documented. And I know that Father Halloran, in interviews late in his life, would be asked point blank, "Did you believe it was genuine possession?" And he'd say, without hesitation, yes. Not that he thought so, not that it seemed like it, but yes. Absolute certainty. Make of that what you will. The legacy. In 1971, William Peter Blatty published a novel called The Exorcist. It became a phenomenon, a bestseller, one of the most successful horror novels of all time. The following year, William Friedkin directed the film adaptation. And if you've seen it, if you've watched Linda Blair's head spin and pea soup fly and heard that voice growl, "Your mother sucks cocks in hell," you know how it carved itself into popular culture. Blatty had been inspired by a small article he'd read as a student at Georgetown University, a newspaper clipping about a boy in Maryland who'd undergone an exorcism in 1949. Just a few paragraphs, but it stuck with him. Years later, he researched the case, spoke with people who'd been involved, read Father Halloran's diary, and he wrote his novel. He changed things, of course, made the possessed victim a girl instead of a boy, set it in Georgetown instead of St. Louis, condensed months into weeks, added dramatic flourishes, the spinning head, the levitating bed, the iconic imagery that everyone remembers. But the core? The scratches, the voices, the knowledge, the marathon exorcisms, the sense of fighting something ancient and malevolent. That came from Roland Doe. The movie terrified audiences, made people faint in theaters, sparked a renewed interest in exorcism, in the occult, in the question of spiritual warfare. The Catholic Church saw a surge in exorcism requests, hundreds of them, thousands. Most were dismissed as psychological issues, but some were deemed genuine. The Church's official position is that demonic possession is rare but real, that exorcisms should be performed only as a last resort after every medical and psychological explanation has been exhausted. But when necessary, when all else has failed, a priest must be willing to stand between the possessed and the darkness, to say, "No further." In the name of Christ, no further. And sometimes, it works. So, that's the story. The real story behind The Exorcist.
The boy in Maryland and Missouri who spent months as a battlefield. The priests who fought for him. The family that never gave up. It's not as cinematic as the movie. Not as tidy. Real life never is. But it's stranger. Deeper. More disturbing in its ambiguity. Because the movie gives you answers. Good wins. Evil is defeated. Roll credits. Real life? Real life just gives you questions. Was Roland Doe possessed by a demon, or was he a sick child failed by mid-20th century medicine? Did the exorcism save him, or did he simply recover from a severe psychiatric episode that ran its course? Are demons real? Is possession possible? Is there genuinely a battle between light and dark playing out in hospital rooms and suburban houses and quiet corners where most of us never look? I can't tell you. No one can. Not with certainty. But I can tell you this. The priests who were there believed it. Absolutely. Until the day they died. Roland, now an old man if he's still alive, carried the scars on his body for the rest of his life. Physical scars. Thin white lines where the words had been carved. Mine. Hell. No. And sometimes, late at night, when his house was quiet and his family was asleep, he'd trace those scars with his fingertips and wonder what it was that had marked him, what it was that lived inside him for all those months, and whether it was really, truly gone, or whether part of it remained, sleeping, waiting, a seed planted deep that might, someday, sprout again.
The ripples. But we're not quite done yet. Because stories like this, stories about possession, about exorcism, about the battle between faith and darkness, they don't just end when the victim is healed. They ripple outward. They change things. Let me tell you about what happened after Roland went home, about the people who carried pieces of this story with them, about how a single case in 1949 echoed through the decades, influencing culture, faith, and our understanding of the inexplicable. Because that's what horror really is, isn't it? Not the moment of terror itself, but the way it lingers, the way it changes you, the way you can never quite look at the world the same way again. So, settle back. We're in the home stretch now, but there are still things you need to hear. Things about the priests who survived what they saw in room 314. Things about the hospital itself and what happened in the years after. And things about you. Yes, you. The person listening to this at 2 a.m. wondering if what you just heard was real. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Once you've heard a story like this, really heard it, let it sink in. You're part of it now. The ripples have reached you. And they don't stop. Father Bowdern's silence. After May 1949, Father William Bowdern never spoke publicly about the exorcism. He'd answer questions if asked directly, by church officials, by researchers with proper credentials, but he never sought attention, never wrote a book or gave interviews to journalists hungry for details. He went back to his parish, St. Francis Xavier College Church in St. Louis. He said Mass, heard confessions, visited the sick, did the quiet, unglamorous work that makes up most of priestly life. But those who knew him well said he'd changed. He'd always been serious, focused, dedicated to his calling, but after the exorcism, there was something else, a weight. He'd look at people differently, as if he could see something beneath the surface. Some students at the college where he worked claimed he'd sometimes stare at them with an intensity that was unnerving. Not cruel, not judgmental, just searching. Looking for signs, maybe, of influence, of the thing he'd fought in that hospital room. He continued his work until he died in 1983 at the age of 90. His obituary in the St. Louis papers mentioned his decades of service, his devotion to education, his impact on countless students. It didn't mention room 314. It didn't mention Roland Doe. The church doesn't advertise these things. But Father Bowden's personal papers, donated to the Jesuit archives after his death, contained notes. Decades of notes. Observations about possession, about spiritual warfare, about the signs that someone might be under influence. He'd been watching, all those years, looking for it to happen again. Did it? We don't know. If Father Bowden encountered another case, he kept it even more private than the first. But the notes suggest something. He never stopped believing, never dismissed what he'd experienced as delusion or hysteria or misdiagnosis. To the end of his life, Father William Bowden believed he'd met evil. Real, tangible evil. And he believed he'd defeated it. Once. Father Halloran's testimony. Father Walter Halloran lived the longest, died in 2005 at the age of 83, and unlike Bowden, Halloran was willing to talk, not frequently and never for money, but when serious researchers asked, when documentarians came with cameras and respect, he'd tell the story. He'd pull out his diary, those 26 pages of careful, detailed notes, show the dates, the times, the symptoms, describe the sounds, the smells, the feeling of holding down a child who had the strength of 3 grown men. And he'd always end the same way. Someone would ask, "Do you really believe it was demonic possession, not mental illness or some other explanation?" And Halloran would look them dead in the eye and say, "I was there. I saw it. I held him. And I'm telling you, what was in that boy wasn't human. It wasn't illness. It was something else." No hesitation, no qualification, just certainty. In 2000, Halloran participated in a documentary about the case. He was elderly by then, frail. His hands shook when he opened his diary, but his voice was steady. He described the levitation, the knowledge the entity displayed, the languages, and he said something that stuck with the filmmaker. "People asked me if I was afraid, and yes, I was, terrified. But I was more afraid of what would happen if we didn't fight, if we just walked away and left that boy to whatever had claimed him." The filmmaker asked, "What would have happened?" Halloran paused, looked down at his hands, then said, "I think it would have destroyed him, not killed him. Worse, it would have hollowed him out, used him, and then when it was done, it would have moved on to someone else. These things don't stop on their own. They have to be stopped." These things, plural, as if Halloran knew or suspected that Roland's case wasn't unique, that whatever had possessed him was one of many, one demon among legions. The Alexian Brothers Hospital. The hospital itself had a strange fate. For years after the exorcism, room 314 was avoided. Not officially. There was no sign on the door saying "cursed" or "do not enter." But nurses would request assignments on other floors. Patients who didn't know the history would complain about the room, said it felt wrong, cold, oppressive. Maintenance workers reported tools going missing in that room, light bulbs burning out faster than they should, a persistent smell, faint but there, that no amount of cleaning could remove. The administration, made up largely of the Alexian Brothers' religious order, eventually stopped assigning patients to 314. They used it for storage. Then they just locked it. In 1978, the hospital underwent renovations. They gutted the 5th floor, tore out walls, replaced everything. Room 314 ceased to exist in any meaningful way. It was absorbed into a larger ward, the individual room numbers erased. But the building itself, the whole structure. Alexian Brothers Hospital closed in 1998. Economic reasons officially, healthcare consolidation, the neighborhood changing. All rational explanations. But there were stories, whispered among staff, about that 5th floor, about sounds in the night, about that one room that had been sealed off for decades. After the closure, the building sat empty for years.
Then it was demolished in 2016, torn down completely. Now there's a shopping center there. Ordinary, mundane, the kind of place where people buy groceries and think about what to make for dinner. No plaque marks what happened there. No memorial to the boy who was saved or the priests who saved him. Just pavement and parking spaces and the quiet erasure of history. But sometimes, according to people who work at that shopping center, late at night, after closing, when they're alone in the building, they hear things. Footsteps where no one's walking, doors closing on their own, and a smell, faint, like something rotting. Could be faulty ventilation, could be imagination, could be anything. But it makes you wonder if what the priests expelled from Roland really left, or if it just moved into the walls, waiting.
The boy who lived. Roland Doe, remember, not his real name, went home, recovered, lived a normal life. I mentioned that earlier, but I want to emphasize it, because in a horror story, we expect the victim to remain broken, traumatized, haunted for the rest of their days. Roland wasn't. By all accounts, he integrated back into normal life remarkably well. Finished school, went to college, got a job in engineering, married, had children, grandchildren. He never spoke about 1949. Not to his wife, according to sources close to the family. Not to his kids. It was a closed chapter, a nightmare from childhood that he'd locked away and refused to revisit. Only once, allegedly, did he break that silence. This story is third-hand, so take it for what it's worth. But supposedly, one of Roland's children asked him about the scars, those faint white lines on his torso. The kid was maybe 10 years old, curious, and asked, "Dad, where did those come from?" And Roland looked at his child for a long moment, then said, "Something bad happened to me when I was your age. Something I don't understand. But it's over now, and I'm okay." That was it. That was all he'd say. The child didn't press, maybe sensed that some doors are better left closed. Roland died in the 2020s. I'm being deliberately vague because the family still wants privacy. He died an old man, surrounded by people who loved him, having lived a full, successful, apparently happy life. And at his funeral, none of the eulogies mentioned 1949. None mentioned the months of horror. None mentioned room 314. As far as his family was concerned, he was just dad, grandpa, a good man who'd lived a good life. And maybe that's the real victory. Not that the exorcism worked, though it apparently did, but that Roland refused to let those months define him. He took back his life, moved forward, didn't let the darkness win. That takes a different kind of strength than fighting a demon. It takes the strength to wake up every day, see those scars in the mirror, and to choose to live anyway. To choose normalcy, happiness, love. In its own way, that's as miraculous as anything that happened in that hospital. The cultural impact. The Exorcist, the novel and film, changed horror forever. Everyone knows that. It brought demonic possession into the mainstream, made it not just a religious concern, but a cultural touchstone. Before The Exorcist, possession was niche, something Catholics worried about maybe, but not part of broader cultural consciousness. After, it was everywhere. Books, movies, TV shows. The tropes became standardized. The innocent victim, the skeptical doctor, the believer priest, the climactic battle, the ambiguous ending. You can draw a direct line from The Exorcist to dozens, hundreds of films that followed. The Exorcism of Emily Rose, the Conjuring franchise, The Rite. Every found footage possession movie, every demon-hunting priest character. All of it traces back to William Peter Blatty's novel, which traces back to that newspaper article he read, which traces back to Father Holleran's diary, which traces back to Roland Doe, lying in a hospital bed in 1949, fighting something he couldn't see. One boy, one case, and it shaped how an entire culture thinks about evil. But here's the thing.
The movie version is cleaner than reality, more satisfying. It gives you a narrative arc. Setup, confrontation, resolution. The demon is defeated. The girl is saved. Good triumphs. Real life is messier. Did the exorcism really work, or did Roland just get better? Did the entity leave because it was expelled, or because it accomplished whatever it came to do? The priests believed they won. Roland lived a normal life, which suggests victory. But there's no way to know for certain. And that ambiguity, that uncertainty, is what makes the true story more frightening than any movie. Because movies end, credits roll, you leave the theater and return to reality. But reality doesn't offer that closure. Reality just keeps going, and the questions linger. The church's response. After the Roland Doe case, the church didn't suddenly start performing exorcisms on every troubled teenager. If anything, they became more cautious. The publicity around The Exorcist, even though the church wasn't officially connected to the film, led to an avalanche of requests. Parents convinced their kids were possessed, adults claiming demons, desperate people looking for spiritual solutions to psychological problems. The church developed stricter protocols. Every exorcism request now required extensive medical evaluation, rule out physical illness, psychiatric evaluation, rule out mental illness, observation by trained clergy over an extended period, evidence of phenomena that couldn't be explained naturally, explicit permission from a bishop. Only after jumping through all those hoops could an exorcism even be considered. Most requests were denied, redirected to doctors and therapists, compassionately but firmly. Because the church learned something from cases like Roland's. True possession is rare, and claiming it too readily does more harm than good. It pathologizes mental illness, gives false hope, delays proper treatment. But, and this is important, the church never stopped believing that genuine possession could happen. To this day, the Vatican trains exorcists. Certified priests who've studied the ritual, the signs, the spiritual warfare theology. They're available when needed. How often are they needed? The church doesn't publish statistics, but experts estimate that there are perhaps a few dozen genuine exorcisms performed worldwide each year, out of billions of Catholics. Rare, incredibly rare, but not zero. Which means the church, however modern, however scientifically minded in most areas, maintains a space for the supernatural, for evil that's more than psychological, for battles that can't be won with therapy and medication. Whether you find that comforting or terrifying probably says a lot about your worldview. The sound of pages turning, old paper, dry, fragile. We're almost done now, just a little further. But before we finish, I want to talk about belief. Because that's what this story is really about, isn't it? Not demons or exorcisms or priests or rituals. It's about belief. What we choose to believe about the world, about ourselves, about the nature of good and evil. The skeptic says, Roland was sick. The priests were well-meaning but misguided. Everything can be explained naturally if we look hard enough. The believer says, Roland was possessed. The priests saved him. Evil is real and sometimes wears a human face. Both positions require faith. Yes, even skepticism requires faith. Faith that the material world is all there is, that consciousness is merely neurons firing, that love and hate and everything in between can be reduced to chemistry and electricity. Neither can be proven absolutely. You can't prove demons exist, but you also can't prove they don't. You can point to medical explanations for every symptom, but you can't explain all the symptoms simultaneously. The strength, the knowledge, the languages, the physical phenomena. Take any one individually and there's a rational explanation, but together, the probability becomes unlikely. Not impossible, but unlikely. So we're left with choice. What will you believe? What can you live with believing? Because here's the secret they don't tell you. Belief changes you. What you choose to accept as real shapes how you move through the world. If you believe possession is possible, you'll see threats everywhere. Shadows become suspect. Strange behavior becomes sinister. The world becomes a more dangerous place, but also, paradoxically, a place where good and evil have meaning, where fighting matters, where faith can be a weapon. If you believe it's all explainable, the world feels safer, more predictable, but also smaller, flatter. A place where mystery has been explained away, and wonder is just ignorance waiting for science to catch up. Neither is wrong, neither is right. They're just different ways of being human. And the story of Roland Doe, real or not, true or embellished, possession or illness, asks you to choose. What will you believe?
The long night ends. The sound of a clock ticking. Slow, steady, almost hypnotic. It's late now, or early, depending on how you look at it. That strange hour when night hasn't quite released its grip, but morning is coming anyway. When the world is suspended between darkness and light. We've been here a while, you and I, sitting in the digital glow, listening to a story about a boy from 75 years ago. A boy who may or may not have been possessed by something ancient and evil. A boy who suffered and survived and went on to live an ordinary life. And maybe you're wondering why I told you all this. Why spend 2 hours on a story that ultimately can't be verified, that leaves more questions than answers? Let me tell you. Why horror matters. Horror, real horror, not the jump scare variety, is about confronting the limits of our understanding. It's about standing at the edge of what we know and peering into what we don't. Roland Doe's story, whether you believe it literally or not, is about that edge. It's about a family that encountered something they couldn't explain, couldn't rationalize away, couldn't fix with medicine or prayer or simply ignoring it. They had to face it, had to name it, had to fight it. And in doing so, they confronted fundamental questions. Is evil real? Can it touch us? Can we defeat it? These aren't just religious questions, they're human questions. Every culture, every civilization, every era of human history has grappled with them. The details change: demons, jinn, evil spirits, psychological complexes. But the core question remains: is there darkness in the world that wants to destroy us? And if there is, what do we do about it? Roland's story offers one answer. You fight. You don't give up. You hold on to whatever faith you have. Faith in God, faith in medicine, faith in love. And you don't let the darkness win. Simple, maybe simplistic, but there's power in it. The priest's burden. I think about the priests sometimes. Bowdern, Bishop, Halloran. What it must have been like to carry that memory for the rest of their lives. To know something most people will never believe. To have seen proof of something ineffable and be unable to share it in a way that satisfies skeptics. Father Halloran tried, gave interviews, showed his diary, described in careful detail what he'd witnessed. And still, people doubted, called it misremembered, exaggerated, influenced by religious bias. How do you live with that? Knowing what you know and being unable to make anyone else truly understand. It must be lonely. But maybe there's also freedom in it, because the priests didn't need external validation. They didn't need scientific studies or peer-reviewed articles confirming their experience. They knew. And that knowledge, that certainty, shaped the rest of their lives, made them who they were, guided their work, their faith, their understanding of their calling. Father Bowdern went back to his parish and served for 30 more years, watching for signs, protecting his flock, ready to fight again if called upon. Father Halloran lived into old age, bearing witness, keeping the story alive so that others might learn, might prepare. Father Bishop, we know less about him. He's the quiet one in this story. But he was there. He helped. He did his part. And in the end, maybe that's all any of us can do. Show up, do our part. Fight the darkness in whatever form it takes in our own lives. Sometimes the darkness is a demon. Sometimes it's depression, addiction, despair, hatred.
the thousand small evils that wear at us from the inside. Different battles, same war. There's a reason possession stories are so compelling, so persistent, why they show up in every culture, every era, from ancient Mesopotamia to modern horror films. I think it's because possession is the ultimate loss of control. Your body, your own body, becomes a prison. Something else moves your hands, speaks with your mouth, hurts the people you love while you watch helplessly from inside. It's a primal fear, the fear that we're not really in control, that the self we think of as solid and permanent is actually fragile, permeable, that something can get in. On a literal level, most of us will never experience demonic possession, but on a metaphorical level, we experience it all the time. When grief takes over and we can't function, when rage makes us say things we don't mean, when anxiety paralyzes us, when addiction hijacks our decision-making, all of these are losses of control. All of them feel in the moment like something else has taken over, like we're watching our lives happen from inside a body that won't obey us. And the fight to reclaim ourselves, to reclaim our lives, to say, no, this is mine, you can't have it, is its own kind of exorcism. Might not involve Latin prayers and holy water, might involve therapy, medication, support groups, time, patience, work. But it's the same battle. The battle to be yourself again, to reclaim your life, to say, no, this is mine, you can't have it. Roland's story, stripped of its supernatural elements, is about a boy who lost himself, and a group of people who refused to give up on him, who fought, literally fought, to bring him back. And they succeeded. That's worth remembering.
The last secret. Here's something I haven't told you yet. Something that didn't make it into William Peter Blatty's novel. Something the priests rarely mentioned even in their private accounts. Roland had visitors during his time in the hospital. Not family, not doctors. Other presences. Father Halloran recorded it, page 19 of his diary. A brief note, almost throwaway. April 16th, 2:30 a.m. Roland reports seeing figures in the room, describes them as standing against the wall. 3 of them. Says they don't speak, just watch. Seems sad. When asked if they're frightening, Roland says no, says they feel familiar. Cannot see them ourselves. Later, after the exorcism succeeded, Father Bowdern asked Roland if he remembered the figures. Roland said yes, said they'd been there most nights, watching the exorcism, watching him. Bowdern asked who Roland thought they were, and Roland said, I think they were protecting me. Bowdern asked, protecting you from what? Roland looked at him with an expression Bowdern later described as ancient, too old for his face. And Roland said, from becoming what it wanted me to be. Then he changed the subject, never spoke of the figures again. Father Bowdern included this in his final report to Archbishop Ritter, noted it as significant, but didn't speculate on what it meant. Angels? Spirits? Guardians? The prayers of everyone who'd been petitioning heaven on Roland's behalf made manifest? We don't know. But it suggests something. That even in the deepest darkness, even when evil seems overwhelming, Roland wasn't alone. Something was watching over him. Something was fighting alongside the priests, unseen but present. And maybe, that's why the exorcism worked. Not just because of the ritual, or the faith of the priests, or the resilience of the boy, but because he was protected, loved, held in the arms of something greater than the darkness trying to claim him. All right, we're done. Almost dawn. You can probably see it if you look outside. That faint lightening of the sky, the darkness receding. You've been with me for 2 hours.
2 hours in the company of shadows and priests and a boy who became a battlefield. 2 hours contemplating evil and faith and the limits of human understanding. How do you feel? Scared? Skeptical? Somewhere in between? That's normal. That's okay. Horror's job isn't to give you answers, it's to ask questions, to make you look at the darkness and wonder, what if? What if Roland really was possessed? What if demons are real? What if there are battles being fought right now in hospital rooms and suburban houses and quiet corners that most of us never see? What if the world is stranger and more dangerous and more meaningful than we usually let ourselves believe? You don't have to answer. You don't have to decide. Just sit with it. Let it settle. Let the story do what stories do. Change you, just a little. Make you see the world differently. Make you wonder. And maybe, the next time you hear scratching in the walls late at night, you'll pause, listen, and think, probably just the house settling. Probably. But, closing words. If you're still here, thank you for listening, for staying, for being willing to enter the dark with me. Roland Doe, wherever he is or was, lived through something none of us can fully understand. The priests who helped him carried that knowledge to their graves. The church keeps records locked away in Vatican archives that most of us will never see. The truth, the real absolute truth, is probably lost to time, obscured by belief and doubt and the simple passage of decades. But the story remains, and stories have power. They teach us, warn us, comfort us, prepare us. They remind us that we're not the first people to face darkness. Others have gone before, others have survived. And if they could do it, so can we. Whatever darkness you're fighting, literal or metaphorical, remember Roland. Remember the priests. Remember that some battles are won not through strength, but through persistence, through refusing to give up, through faith in something, anything beyond yourself. And remember that you're not alone, even when it feels like it, even when the darkness seems absolute. There are always lights somewhere, always people fighting alongside you, always hope, even in the darkest room, even at 3 a.m., even when you can't see the way forward. The sun is coming up now. Look outside. See? The shadows are receding. The night is ending. The world is waking up to its ordinary self. Coffee brewing, alarms ringing, people starting their days. Normal. Safe, mundane. And that's okay. That's good. Because most of life is normal. Most of life is safe. Most of us will never face what Roland faced. But we've been reminded, haven't we? Reminded that the normal world sits on top of something deeper, something stranger. And every once in a while, very rarely, but it happens, the surface cracks, and something looks through. When it does, we hope there are people like Father Bowden ready to fight, people like Father Halloran ready to document, people like Roland's family ready to never give up. We hope. And maybe that's enough. Silence. Pure silence. Then, very faintly, the sound of a child laughing. Distant. Joyful. Innocent.